South Africans from different faith groups have continued to hold protests in Cape Town calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel and the United States have remained steadfast in defending the war on Gaza, which is being led or conducted by Israel, which is in pursuit of wiping out the armed group Hamas. Around 1,200 people were killed by Hamas and over 200 others taken hostage at the beginning of October. Well, since then, Israel has killed over 18,000 Palestinians in Gaza and turned down calls for a ceasefire. Yazeed Kamaldien reports from Cape Town.
While governments have not been able to secure a ceasefire in Gaza via the United Nations, calls for an end to Israeli attacks on Palestinian civilians continue. In Cape Town, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign organizes regular protests calling for an end to Israeli military action. It has been more than 2 months of conflict since October 7th, when Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel and captured hostages. In Cape Town, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign has organized protests outside the Samson Center, which houses various Jewish organizations. This includes the Israel Center, which offers Zionist education and helps South African Jews move to Israel. The campaign's coordinator says Israel is committing crimes against humanity.
We are part of a global community outraged at the horror of what is taking place in Palestine at the bloody hands of the Israeli regime. They are committing, as our cabinet has said, a genocide, a holocaust, and are committing a crime of apartheid against the Palestinians. Almost 20,000 people have died. 75% are women and children. And we are here to call for a ceasefire, for an immediate ceasefire. The world has called for it, but Israel enjoys an impunity covered by the United States, and are continuing with their war crimes, their crimes against humanity. And we are on the streets because we want to stop it, and we want to stop the agencies in South Africa, the South African Zionist networks, who aid and abet and are complicit in it. Not only the organizations, but the corporations affiliated to them as well.
Protesters who support the Palestine Solidarity Campaign are diverse in race and religion. Among them are doctors, artists, and people from all walks of life who say they are focused not on the religious differences in Palestine and Israel, but on the humanitarian needs of people. South African protesters also liken Israel's policies to their own country's apartheid past.
Well, obviously there's genocide happening in Palestine, and first of all as a person, and second of all as a public health researcher and a South African, it is my duty to show up and be counted in protest action across Cape Town. As someone who has sort of living with a legacy of apartheid and aware of the huge social and economic and political implications 30 years later, and kind of like doing reparations for my parents in action, it's important to stand up against other apartheid states globally, like Israel.
It's a human thing for me. It's about people and people suffering. It's about occupation. It's about an apartheid state. Having grown up in an apartheid state and having the background that I have and being a daughter of Cape Town and coming from parents that were activists themselves, I think that it's tragic when people can't see beyond what's been spun to them. And what's been meant to keep people divided, as opposed to just seeing what's the reality on the ground, what's really going on. I think that it's also easy for people just to spin this as a religious thing. I've got friends and family members of all religions. I myself am Christian, and I think that that's important, that we acknowledge who we are as people, but we don't show up only as one thing. We show up as people first, and I think caring about what's happening to other people is more important than defending your right to freedom of religion, which is equally important. But I think what's happened, especially in Cape Town, this vileness that we see being directed at Muslim people, being directed at Jewish people, it's terrible and horrific, and it needs to stop.
I'm seeing a tremendous amount of apathy a tremendous amount of silence amongst, not all, but especially from my fraternity, which is the jazz music world. Surprisingly, jazz music comes from a position of struggle, and jazz musicians historically have always stood for the rights of people and for humanity. And I've seen recently a real silence that is really troubling for me. And I would like to encourage my fellow musicians, my fellow jazz musicians all around the world to see through the disinformation and to take the effort, make the effort to educate yourself, to see what's actually happening, because it's no longer unclear. It's not complicated. This is a genocide.
The Cape South African Jewish Board of Deputies says the Palestine Solidarity Campaign and others who protest at the Samson Center are showing up at the wrong door.
Well, they're in the wrong place. If they want to protest about Israel or what's happening in the Middle East, they should be standing outside the Israeli embassy, which is in Pretoria.
Free, free Palestine! The Cape South African Jewish Board of Deputies also says that Jews who call for a ceasefire in Gaza are in the minority. It says organizations such as the South African Jews for a Free Palestine do not speak for all Jews.
So to be clear, the Jewish Board of Deputies, we believe in a two-state solution. We believe peace in the Middle East and rights for Israelis and Palestinians. And of course, we all want an end to the conflict and the bloodshed. It's very simple. Hamas return the hostages, and then a ceasefire can be spoken about. Now, the South African Jews for a Free Palestine represents a minority of the Jewish community that have different beliefs on what is happening in the Middle East, and they're entitled to their own freedom of expression, but they most certainly do not speak on behalf of the majority of the Jewish community in South Africa.
South African Jews for a Free Palestine have been calling for a ceasefire in Gaza every week when it hosts Shabbat dinners and also during its Hanukkah religious celebrations. It has co-hosted Shabbat dinners with Muslims uniting across religious differences to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. It agrees with the Cape South African Jewish Board of Deputies that it is a minority.
Well, I mean, it's obviously their prerogative to try and make us sound less important and less valid. I would be interested to hear if you asked them how many members they have, what they said, because it's very difficult to find that information. The Jewish Board of Deputies sort of exists as a default organization that once you walk into a Jewish school or a shul, you just automatically become part of them. And so I can tell you, as a Jewish person who went to a Jewish school for 12 years in South Africa, I never got contacted once by phone or by email from the Jewish Board of Deputies to ask me what I thought or what I wanted or how I wanted to be represented. And so there is a sense in which they exist to represent most Jews, but it's mostly a sort of default sense, and it's very hard to know what that means in practice. You'd have to go around asking all the different individual Jews, does this body represent me or not? So I mean, it's true. Our own numbers are not that big. You know, we're in a few hundred maybe. But I don't think that makes us unimportant. I don't think that makes our views invalid, and we try to express them as often as possible, and we're growing all the time.
South African Jews for a Free Palestine says it is not easy for Jews who speak up for Palestinians. Some of them face backlash from their families.
One of the main reasons they don't want to join us is because they're scared of being excommunicated from their families. Many Jewish South Africans have families who are Zionists or support Israel. Many of us also have family in Israel, right? And so there's a deterrent effect to sort of say anything that's too provocative or too controversial, because what exactly can happen, and what has happened to many of us for our entire life growing up here, is that the sort of mainstream community doesn't really want to associate with you if those are your views. And this actually parallels the experience of left activist Jewish people in South Africa during Apartheid as well, which, you know, those people, the Joe Slobos and Ruth Firsts and Dennis Goldbergs and Ronnie Castrol's, those people who opposed Apartheid were also sort of excommunicated from the Jewish community back then. And so there's a history and there's a politics to it and there's a story about it. And the last thing that I'll say is that, I mean, my personal view, and I think probably the view of most people in SAJFP, is that what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Gaza, is not politically or historically complicated. But we might admit that it's emotionally complicated for Jewish people, right? And so there's this a kind of a sensitivity at some point, even beyond the fact that there's bullying and intimidation, that people don't want to be insensitive to other people's feelings. And Jewish people do have a lot of inherited trauma. Of course, that trauma has been weaponized to hurt Palestinians, but the trauma is still there.
Muslims who joined South African Jews for a Free Palestine for their Hanukkah ceremony say they want to see solidarity between people of different religions.
More about the solidarity with Palestine. I mean, it's not just an issue about religion, it's an issue about human rights. So if all of us come together and band together for this solidarity, then victory is inevitable.
Yeah, just come in solidarity for our Jewish brothers and sisters and to call on a ceasefire that's happening in Gaza.
Do you think that it's important for people of different religions to stand together and call for a ceasefire in Gaza?
Yes, because this hasn't anything to do with religion, this is to do with human rights. So we have to come together as humanity and call for a ceasefire to end the occupation, end the apartheid, end the slaughtering of innocent lives, men, women and children alike.
It is similar to our apartheid. It wasn't just one single race, it was every single race. Everywhere around the world, it was a global affair which ended our apartheid, and hopefully this movement will end the atrocities in Palestine.
While thousands of lives have been lost in Gaza and Israeli hostages remain captured by Hamas, there is no end in sight yet to the bloodshed. In other parts of the world, Muslims and Jews have faced retaliatory attacks related to the situation in Palestine and Israel. But in Cape Town, Jews and Muslims seem to continue efforts to come together for peace. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Yazeed Kamaldien in Cape Town.